Hey everybody, Meg Colleen here. Thank you so much for joining. In today's video, I'm going to be going over how to front loop and back loop crochet. It's a pretty simple technique. It's just a matter of placing your hook in a different spot than normal. I've got a little sample worked up here. I've got a section of back loop single crochets. Gives a really nice texture to the fabric. It's really good for wrist cuffs, for waistbands, brims of beanies, things like that. It's often called a ribbed stitch because it does create that texture. And then next I've got a little section of single crochets with a slip stitch return. This one gives this really beautiful texture with almost like a faux like knitting. This one, the single crochet with slip stitch return, there is a front and a back to the fabric. You can see here these 3 raised rows. On the back of the fabric, we do not have that. And then next up, I've got a section of just back loop slip stitches. This creates the most stretchy fabric. I also use this one a lot for wrist cuffs, waistbands, etc. This one looks the same front and back. And this was all done simply by crocheting in the back loop as opposed to regular. All right, guys, let's jump in. Alrighty, so here I've got a couple rows set up of just regular single crochet. You can see here that it creates just a simple flat fabric. Very beautiful. Single crochets are pretty introductory stitches. In order to front loop or back loop, the only thing you need to know really is the anatomy of your crochet stitch. So normally when we hold our work towards us, this is pretty much the view we're looking at. If you tilt your work towards you, you can see the top of your last completed row. And this is basically just a row of sideways V's. Each V has 2 legs, just like a V does, and they are all sitting sideways. When we crochet like normal, we insert our hook in this spot here, and you can see that both of those legs are on top of our crochet hook. In order to back loop or front loop crochet, we simply use the correct loop of the leg. The loop that is working closest towards you, that is the front loop. The loop or leg that is farther from you is considered the back loop. And that's it. That is basically all you need to know in order to back loop or front loop crochet. Let's do a couple of rows now. So I'm going to start out with just a couple rows of back loop single crochet. I'm going to set up my turning stitch and back loop, hook goes in, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through both. Let's do a couple more before we stop and look at that texture. Alrighty, so you can see because we've used that back loop only, we've got this little raised ridge that is created by the front loop that we have left unworked. Once we turn our work, our front and back loops flip-flop. So now because this is the leg that is closest to me, this is considered the front loop. This is now the leg that is considered farther from me, so it is the back loop. So if we were to do another row of single crochets, we would have a texture, a little ribbing on both sides of our fabric, or of our project, I should say. So now we've got a raised texture on this second side that we've worked. And if we flip it over, we've also got that raised texture from the first row we created. I don't know if I can show you from the side. You can kind of sort of see, it's hard to show, that we've got a little textured here and then it bumps up, and then our next row it's going to bump down. And it's just kind of going to continue a very slight zigzag, which creates that ribbed texture. If we were to switch over to single crochets, it is the same exact method, just a different stitch. I'm sorry, slip stitching. We would still insert our hook in that same back loop and then slip stitch as normal. And that is how that super stretchy fabric is created, that last section of pink that I showed you. And I can already tell you I am using way too tight a tension for these slip stitches, but we'll be able to see what it looks like nonetheless. So that completed row of back loop stitch, slip stitch, that's what's going to give us that raised faux knit-like texture. If you're trying slip stitching rows, consecutive rows, and you're having trouble with your edges getting wonky, maybe portions of your project are pulling in at the ends, maybe other portions are too loose and slipping out. Slip stitching really is super dependent on yarn tension. So if you're having trouble with wonky edges, just keep playing with your tension. I will even go so far as to make sure that I have enough time to complete the entire section of slip stitching in one go, because that way I've got a better shot at keeping consistent tension, because I know that the next day when I sit down to finish those slip stitches, my tension is just going to be off. So now we've got 2 completed rows of those back-to-back slip stitches. And if you wanted to do front loop, all you would do is insert your hook under that front loop instead of the back. And you get these wonderful textures, wonderful stretching, super simple but very versatile. If you guys have any questions about front loop or back loop crocheting, please drop a comment down below. Otherwise, like and subscribe for more.